We're back in a 6.2 LT L86 and it feels great. This build was done a long time ago and it has some miles on it. It actually ran a King of the Hammers with Genrite. This was a Genrite Elite chassis that the customer purchased, and then he purchased a wrecked 2012 Rubicon, and we took the body off and put it on the Genrite chassis. He finally got it titled and registered last week. It did pass the engine change or emissions check here in Nevada, so it's on the road and we get to test drive it. So it has quite a few off-road miles on it, but not on-road. So we're going to go out and take it to the mountain tomorrow. This is a 2012 JKUR. Some of the stuff it has is an Atlas 2-speed, Dana 60s, could be Dana 70s, don't quote me on that. It's got front and rear lockers, of course, full skids, full aluminum skids down the bottom, 1-ton brakes on this, or 3/4-ton brakes, I'm not sure which. All custom brake lines. We have hydraulics, made for rocks air system. It's an onboard air compressor and air tank, and it has a smart module that inflates and deflates your tires to a preset value. You can do it using a manual input pad or Bluetooth to your phone. I think we're going to try to use the manual input tomorrow, but essentially you can inflate and deflate all 4 tires at the same time. It has some smart technology where it'll deflate the tires to within about 1 psi and then fine tune it from there. It doesn't stop and check often. It only stops and checks, I think, once. So we got 40s, bead locks, Genrite's Elite suspension, which is 4-link coilovers, but what we're concerned about is the powertrain. We have a 2015 L86 in this Jeep with a 8-speed 8090 transmission, and as I mentioned, Atlas 2-speed. This one actually never really had a problem with shifting or drivability. It always ran pretty good. I'd say it's running a little bit smoother than before with the new upgrades, but we've had other 15s that had a lot more improvement after updating the GM software. So let's do a cold start on this L86 on this wet, cold morning. So this vehicle was originally a 2012 Rubicon manual transmission. And if you look at the prindle, you'll notice that it's lit up. That's because our Mocan module lights it up. It also controls the neutral safety, the brake interlock so it doesn't go clickety-click-click. It does the reverse lights. And if we bring it back into the tap shift gate, you'll see that we have full tap shift functionality displayed on the dash, even with this manual transmission JK. This JK's got an Atlas 2, which works perfect with these LTs. If you talk to Steve Roberts over at Advance, he can give you some advice on which Atlas to get, but essentially they do have a Motec Atlas 2 that's set up for our conversions, both for the Gen 4s and the Gen 5s. We prefer the 3:1 ratio for general off-roading. There are other options like the 3.8 and the 4.3 for special applications, but really try to stay away from the ratios that are too short because you're not going to get wheel speed up. With this 8-speed, yes, you do get that diverse gearing that helps, but still, if you want to run trails in 4 low, don't go too low on that transfer case ratio, otherwise you're going to be running the trails in 4 high, which really works well because this 8-speed, when you pull it back into the bump shift gate, has really good low range gearing. You got a 4.6 low, which I find too low even in 2-wheel drive high or 4-wheel drive high, so that gives you some options. This Jeep does have a Genrite rear fuel tank, and it's set up so that it basically reads the top half of the tank on full because there's a sump and the sending unit can't get to the top and to the bottom because the way the tank is designed, at least not easily. We did use a buoy or a bob once, but basically what it does is it reads the top half of the tank on full, and then at half to empty it reads accurately so you know when you're going to run out of fuel. These LTs do build up heat quickly. The cooling systems in these LTs, I'm not really sure, I haven't studied them yet, but they do seem to work better than the LS. They seem to run cooler even with higher compression, but the heater does warm up very rapidly. This JK had the factory roll bar removed and a full Genrite roll bar installed. So as I mentioned, this LT is a 15, and this one really never had any issues with shifting or power. It is better now with the newer firmware, but I do believe this was a later model 15. I think GM in 14 and 15 learned a lot about these LTs and made rapid corrections. It's nice to be back in this LT. It's got a lot of torque. I know this JK is heavy. We got 40s. And because of the benefits of the LT, it really makes this JK feel lighter and nimble compared to the other power options. The V6 is just pathetic, as you know. The LSs are great, but this LT is just a little bit better, especially when combined with this 8-speed transmission. I've always said that the 8-speed transmission, once it's dialed in, will probably be the transmission of choice, and I think that's true now. It really comes into play when you're running the larger, heavier tires. These 40s can weigh 200 pounds each, so you put 800 pounds of tire on a 7,000 pound JK, and that's a lot of load on an engine. But the LT loves load. That's what it lives to do. It's not like the 3.6 that has to rev to the moon to get into its power band to move your JK. This LT, right off the line, has got more torque than the Pentastar has anywhere. So this LT is perfectly matched for this vehicle. The other side of this LT, as I've mentioned many times in these videos, is the drivability. It's extremely mild. Even though we have this power, we're not having to deal with the downside and the drivability. I remember Cam and Motors and going, and this is way back in the 80s, going off-road and the rump and the idle hunting, the engine stalling when you hit the power steering pump, all that's gone. This truck LT does have a vacuum pump for the brakes, so even if you're crawling at low speed, at low RPM, you still have good power brakes. The Pentastar JKs use an auxiliary vacuum pump to assist the brake booster, but you don't need it with this LT with a vacuum pump. The LT ones run intake manifold vacuum, and we've done several with no issues. So the LT again lends itself really well to having a heavy JK and proper braking. The LT engines in general use electric power steering in the vehicles they came from. So we fit a power steering pump from the JK onto the LT. So we're running a power steering pump, a variable displacement air compressor, and a smart charging alternator. And yes, the alternator is controlled by the GM computer. In fact, in this LT, pretty much everything is controlled by the GM computer. Our air conditioning, condenser pressure, cooling fan, AC idle bump, alternator charging, variable displacement air conditioning, it's all controlled by the GM computer, just like it would be in the donor vehicle. There is no hot rodding or hacking, and most of that's done over the CAN bus. It's not done discreetly. Getting back to the power steering, we have actually prototyped a couple of electric power steering setups, and we did that with our LT and the JL because the JL does come with an electric power steering pump. The JL is somewhat interesting because it uses an electric motor to power a steering gear, and I believe Jeep did that to keep the steering more traditional. Right now we've been running these regular hydraulic power steering pumps for years on these LTs, and they work perfect. Haven't had any issues with them. So you can run your traditional PSC, Redneck Ram, AGR, HOW, whatever hydraulic system you want, if you want, or you don't have to run them at all. You can run the stock setup with a stock reservoir and you're good to go. The accessory drive in the LT lays out really well. You guys might want to watch the new video I'm going to have out on a comparison between the Gen 4 and the Gen 5 GM V8s. But the accessory drive on the LT, especially the truck, offsets the water pump, so we have no more interference with the fan. We have plenty of room. The alternator, power steering pump, and air compressor all mount out of the way, so there's no conflicts like there was with the Gen 4. The Gen 4 with a GM drive, in my opinion, is not the best way to go. With a modded JK with a high lift, yeah, they work good. We did them for a while. But really the JK drive with our billet accessory brackets work the best on the Gen 4 engines. But on these Gen 5 engines, to get the maximum benefit from the Gen 5 computer, we're using all Gen 5 accessories. That does require custom air conditioning lines, but not power steering lines. So we're taking that into account. We are actually working on some adapters so that we can use the factory AC lines in our Gen 5 builds, and that'll be coming up soon. We actually have a lot of stuff coming up. We've been silent for a while, especially on our YouTube channel, but that doesn't mean we were dormant. It actually means we were hard at work, and there's a lot of technology in the bag right now that you guys are gonna see in the near future. So we're gonna take this JK to the mountain and let's see how it does. Hey, this is Robbie from Motec. We're out here with this Gen Right Jeep. We're gonna give it a run. This Jeep has an onboard air system from Made for Rocks, at least I think that's the name, and good old Dave Knight wants me to give this a try. He did send me instructions in a PDF. I'm gonna see how intuitive this system is and do it without the instructions. So what I have here is the Jeep with the Made for Rocks onboard air system installed and this bag of hoses. This system inflates these tires all four at the same time and deflates them. This also has the optional dual battery setup, so you can integrate dual batteries into this. And let's walk around the other side. It can be used in a manual mode and it can be used in this smart mode. At least I'm guessing this is how you inflate and deflate smart. In addition, this is able to connect to Bluetooth and be controlled by your iPhone, and from what I understand, Android. Okay, so I think it's pretty obvious that these four hoses are going to go to each one of the tires. Two on this side, two on the other. Interesting. This has got a lock so that you just push it onto the valve stem and then lock it. You don't have to screw it on. Let's see how that works. Okay, so I got all four tires hooked up. Let's go back to the control panel. Now my logical mind here is saying, since we're going to deflate, we don't need to pump up the air system, which would be this way. I am going to put it over to this side, and it says that we can either deflate or inflate manually or automatically. So let's go to automatic. Now it did say 12 psi. Let's let it do its thing. So it's been deflating for about 4 or 5 minutes and we're already down to 14.5 psi. Okay guys, we're at 12.5. That was our set pressure. Let's see what happens. There it goes. It just cut off. Alright, I must say that I think that the cruise control stock is a tap shift lever. Any kind of paddle or switches on the steering wheel is a failure for tap shift. As you can see, we're in drive right now. We're going to come down here to our bump shift lever. We're going to pull it down. You can see it says we're in second gear. So if I want to tap shift up, I can turn this wheel as much as I want. One up, one down. Now, the problem with this is your dog hits it, your knee hits it, a suitcase hits it. You're going to shift, where with the fixed switch on the steering column, up is always up, down is always down, and you don't have any issue with interference. Alright, I'd say it's been about 7, maybe 8 minutes since we started to inflate. Compressor's been running the whole time, and we are at 24 psi. 24.5 psi. There it goes, cut off at 29. Checking pressure. Okay, so what it's doing now, I think, is its final stage. It's going to check what the current pressure is. We're right there at 30 psi. That's about where I wanted it. My Bluetooth isn't connected, but basically you have all your functions here on this app and you can remotely control the system. Let's take a look at this auxiliary panel. Now I do believe this is an option for the Made for Rock system, and it looks like what we have here is a battery measure button, which will tell you that the battery voltage is in one battery or two, I'm not sure. One thing I want to say about these Gen 5 LTs is that they do run smart charging in our system, so you're going to see this voltage vary quite a bit. That's how the Gen 5s work. GM actually had a problem with that because these smart charging systems can drop into the high 12s, low 13s, and go into the high 14s, and customers thought they had bad alternators, but they really didn't. This other button to the right appears to be a jump button, so if your battery does go dead, you push that, it connects the two batteries together, and then you can start. How you doing up there, Wendy?
Getting out our little drone.
Is climbing trees part of your job description?
Today it is.
I got a feeling you've done that before.